Busy day today. Good news on the legal merits today. This morning, the New Mexico prosecutor announced that Alec Baldwin would be facing 2 counts of manslaughter in the shooting death of Helena Hutchins. That shooting death happened October 21st, 2021. Today is January 19th, 2023. So we're 13 months after the shooting. I would point out that somebody in the room wrote a piece the day after the shooting pointing out that, well, we don't have much information yet. This could be a terrible accident. It could be manslaughter. And within 3 days after that post, meaning 4 days after the shooting, I had a very detailed legal analysis done in which I argued that this was pretty unambiguously a classic case of reckless felony involuntary manslaughter on the part of Alec Baldwin. Got an unbelievable amount of pushback on that analysis, but it's pretty straightforward. Why it took 13 months for the prosecutor to come to the same decision? I don't know. I mean, certainly some time is warranted, investigating the evidence, speaking to witnesses. But in any case, Alec Baldwin did get charged today. It's also worth noting that Gutierrez, the young woman who was the armorer, also is to be charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. Earlier in the, last year, David Hall, the assistant director who handed the pistol to Alec Baldwin on the set, announced it was a cold gun. He's pleaded to a charge of negligent handling of a firearm, suspended sentence. So his criminal woes are fixed and done. No prison time for him. Probably a smart agreement to take under the circumstances. Lets him move on with his life. So this morning, New Mexico District Attorney Mary Carmack Altweiss announced actor Alec Baldwin would be charged with 2 counts of manslaughter over the October 21st, 2021 shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, as Baldwin and Hutchins were working together on the set of the low-budget Western movie Rust. And what essentially happened was that Helena Hutchins, the cinematographer, was behind the camera. The camera was lined up on Baldwin. They were preparing for a shot inside a small church. The scene involved Baldwin quickly presenting a pistol from under his jacket from a holster. He's dressed in cowboy fashion. The pistol is a revolver of cowboy era type of gun, a real gun. Commonly movie sets, believe it or not, mostly use real guns, except perhaps for extras. But anything that would be a real close-up shot, they typically use real guns. And have various rules for trying to ensure safety on the set. And they're pretty good with it. It's relatively rare if someone gets shot on a movie set, particularly shot dead. But the scene involved Baldwin presenting the revolver from under his coat with some rapidity. And he's doing that repeatedly for the camera, for cinematographer Hutchins. And at some point, he presents the gun, and the gun discharges. It discharges a real bullet. That bullet will hits Hutchins in the side, basically the armpit, traverses her entire chest, comes out the other side of her body, and hits another gentleman who was standing nearby, causing him a non-fatal injury. So he recovers. But Hutchins was mortally wounded. She would die there, she pretty much dead within moments, really. It's hard to survive a cross-body shot like that, and she didn't. Now, Baldwin, of course, has always claimed that this is a terrible tragedy, but not his fault. He doesn't have criminal liability for this. He has settled a civil suit from the Hutchins family. He did that in October for an undisclosed amount. When you're handling inherently dangerous instruments, like explosives, like dangerous chemicals, like firearms, if you're handling something that's inherently dangerous, we simply presume that you know that there's danger involved. Everybody knows, for example, that guns are dangerous, especially, by the way, Alec Baldwin, who's on the board of a gun control organization that exists solely because guns are dangerous. So certainly he knew guns were dangerous. He knew, in this case, that he was handling a real gun. It's not a prop gun in the sense that it's plastic. He didn't think he was being handed a prop gun in the sense that it was plastic. He knew he was being handed, that he was handling a real firearm. And although some new information has been released over the 13 months, none of it changes my legal analysis that Baldwin's conduct in the death of Helena Hutchins unambiguously qualifies as reckless manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. And now, 13 months after that was my legal conclusion, the district attorney has finally decided to share that legal conclusion. Good of her. to do that.
All right, so let's move on. One more topic I wanted to get to because everyone wanted me to get to this, and I want to make sure we save enough time for this one.
Yep.
We have big news, big update here. This I saw it on Twitter first, so I want to give the place.
There we go.
Alec Baldwin is expected to be charged for involuntary manslaughter in Rust. This has been confirmed by the AP, BBC. I'm clapping too because I'm just glad they actually are going to do it. Took them long enough to get their balls together and to like gather their sack and do it, but they would do this for anybody else. If this was somebody on the certainly somebody on the right, a political figure, they would charge them in 10 seconds.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Do you think there's going to be a conviction in the Alec Baldwin case?
Who's on the jury?
Well, the locals, right? Because it's a local case. So
that's really what it all boils down to, right? I mean, how left is that jury?
I don't know. I'll have to do demographic research on that district. I don't know how left that district is. Chat, how left is that district? I think he's going to go for it. Yeah, I do think that he will ultimately be offered a plea bargain.
Yeah,
I don't think Pima's red.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the problem. I think he's going to get a 6 month.
People say it's Santa Fe County. If it's Santa Fe, then that's left.
Yeah, I think he's going to get a 6 month probation plea bargain. That's what I expect.
Branca said it's pretty blue. I believe Branca. If Branca says it, I believe it.
I think he's going to get a 6 month probation deal because at the end of the day, I think they gave one of the producers a 6 month probation deal and
a plea deal.
Yeah, I think they gave him a plea deal, and I think that they might give him a year probation to say, "Oh, you were the trigger man, so we'll give you a little bit more." But his lawyer's claim was something to the effect of, "Well, you know, there's no way he could have known there's a bullet, that there's a live round in there." It's like, no. Anyone who spent nearly as long around guns as he must have during his career, or certainly should have before picking up a real gun, should know that you always treat the gun as if it has live ammunition in it. Always treat the gun as this is like the first thing. I went to a shooting range one time, rule. First rule, and they said that to us 16 times. Always treat it like it's a loaded weapon. So for him to say there's no way for him to know, that's ridiculous. Then you tack onto that he's a producer of a movie that within the preceding 2 weeks had multiple complaints and walkouts about the lack of safety and the fact that there were specifically live rounds on set. And to say that there's no way for him to know is asinine for his lawyer to even make that claim. It's like that. If I was the DA, that would tick me off even more. You're making a public statement pretending that there's no way you should have known. That is asinine. That is really, really asinine. You can go out there, make a public statement, and say we'll beat these charges. He's innocent, and that's it. But to start taking it a step further, saying there's no way for him to know when everyone knows that there was
and there was the Clooney interview, and there was everything. I mean, everybody who's in the industry knows that. Everybody's used a gun knows that. It doesn't matter if it's not his first rodeo. He's done it before.
Come on, yeah, he's been in the business for 40 years.
He's gonna take that fucking plea.
Can you help our viewers understand? So the state officials did a report. It was signed by the chief medical investigator saying that there was no compelling evidence that this was intentional, right?
Right.
So help our viewers understand, if it's an accident, which most people seem to think it is, why is that a crime?
Because just because it's an accident doesn't mean that it's not criminal. Our involuntary manslaughter statute covers unintentional killings, unintentional homicides. The rest of our homicide statutes cover intentional, but unintentional means they didn't mean to do it. They didn't have the intent to kill. But it happened anyway, and it happened because of more than mere negligence, because of they didn't exercise due caution or circumspection, and that's what happened here.
And what's
there she is quoting the statute. They didn't exercise due caution or circumspection. That's straight from the statute. I think she does great, personally.
Response to, there might be people in Baldwin's camp who say that you were overcharging this.
Well, we disagree, and we're going to be taking that in front of a judge and allowing the judge to decide on probable cause. But we think that there is enough there, more than enough there, to move forward on these charges. They acted without due caution and circumspection, meaning they weren't just negligent in their duties, but that they were on notice, that they had duties, and that they should have done or not done something that didn't happen on that set, meaning they should have checked the bullets. They should have checked the gun. They shouldn't have even been using a live gun that day. They should have been using a rubber or a plastic gun. All of these things go together and show that there was just this complacency, lack of care on that set, and it's more than negligence. And I would say it rises to recklessness. The other is goes hand in hand.
So she's saying it's more than negligence. She thinks it could rise to recklessness. There are certain cases that say she might not even have to prove that bar, but at this point she's saying it's so bad. It's even worse than it needs to be. And that happens a lot of times in my cases as well, where we're not going for gross negligence, but we'll say this isn't just negligence. This is gross negligence. It's not unusual for lawyers to say that because, I mean, in a lot of these situations, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And again, Alec Baldwin can point the finger at a lot of people for a lot of the negligence she's describing, except for pointing the gun and pulling the trigger. And I think he knows that, which is why he was so adamant that he didn't pull the trigger and he was following Helena Hutchinson's instructions the entire time.
In hand with a misdemeanor, a petty misdemeanor here in New Mexico called negligent use of a deadly weapon. And that is that someone handled or used or touched a gun in a negligent manner. And to
me, that fits best. If I'm just saying it honestly, and as a defense lawyer, that's the charge I would be most nervous of. I think they can beat involuntary manslaughter for a couple different ways, but if that's what was charged and that's the underlying unlawful act that they're using for involuntary manslaughter, then that might be a well pieced together case. And that's what she's talking about. It's either the lawful act that ends up in a death because of you didn't use reasonable care, or an unlawful act and somebody dies, but it wasn't intentional. If this is the unlawful act, man, I think that is kind of the perfect statute for these facts. I think they could still win, right? Because there's a jury system. And if a jury doesn't think Alec Baldwin did anything wrong and they think that he did exercise reasonable care and it was other people's jobs to do what they were supposed to do before they handed him the gun, so there was nothing he could have possibly done, he could still win. But I'm just saying, based on the facts, that seems like the better charge to me is that petty misdemeanor.
Petty Leather saying no freaking way they charge Baldwin. Yeah. Now, because there's a firearm involved, especially for Alec and for Hannah Reed, with the firearm enhancements, they could face up to 5 years in prison. If they're not found for the firearm enhancements, they could face up to 18 months in prison. Now, would I see Alec Baldwin serving prison time? Probably not. Stabby saying we'll never see it unless it becomes evidence at trial. Well, I think we will. I think we will at some point. And that's solely because I don't see Alec Baldwin taking a plea. I think if I'm his attorneys, I would tell them this is a very triable case. And being faced with it, I think he should take it to trial. Tarkina Meyer says, yes, check out America's Untold Stories with Mark Robert and Eric Hunley. They do talk about this. They talk about this further in depth than I can. Mark Robert has a reporter in Hollywood. He's got a massive knowledge base, can really dive into stuff. He's very good to listen to. They can talk about it a lot.
I'll tell you what he's won. He's won a
demonetized.
Nope. You've won a prosecutor of Alec Baldwin.
Oh yeah,
coming to you.
Oh yeah.
This is
our girl. This is our girl. Yeah, go ahead.
She's the Republican.
Not just the Republican. This is a MAGA mama down there that we helped get elected through campaign contributions from America's Untold Stories, and is a serious, Second Amendment, anti-crime veteran prosecutor who is loaded for bear, my friends. Andrea Reed.
And in an interview with CNN, the DA specifically said that this prosecutor put together the charges that she agreed with about the manslaughter.
Yeah, she's got 25 years experience being a prosecutor, Robert. And if you were up against her, I don't know what you would do to defend your client, one of whom is the young girl, the armorer, who wasn't allowed into the church because of insane zone COVID protocols designed by the Screen Actors Guild to prevent her from getting in zone A. She had to stay outside, Robert. And as a defense attorney, how would you play that?
I guess it depends on what the pled guy says. I'm assuming the pled guy implicates her somehow directly.
Okay. But the pled guy is pled, so he would be declared a guilty party.
Yeah, well, but presumably because he's agreed to cooperate and point fingers and prove their case for them.
I agree. They're talking about Dave Halls, the assistant director, by the way, for everybody.
I thought that Halls was really for Baldwin, though. Halls will get Baldwin, and then Sarah Zachary will go after Hannah, and because Sarah could have been
plea deal with her, right?
No, but she was supposed to be the fourth one charged in theory, and it ended up being 3, Robert.
So maybe there's a cooperation deal.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Didn't plead to a crime, but she agreed to provide testimony if they didn't indict her.
She could be an unindicted co-conspirator too.
I think we all agree that Baldwin is now officially pooping his pants, especially given the enhancements on the involuntary negligence that
I'm
carries
sure his
him.
people told him he was going to be indicted from the.
Yeah, they knew about this. They knew about it.
They knew the day before. They were talking the whole time. The DA did that interview.
I'm sure
She said she was talking to them.
I'm sure they pitched a plea deal to him. Somebody said, I forget who it was, or maybe it was Ricada, said that he did a good breakdown of the Crowder Daily Wire stuff too. But our angle here is going to be different. It's going to be the Mockingbird angle. But but before we get into the Mockingbird angle, on the ball, his take was that he thought Baldwin would plea. But if I thought if Baldwin was going to plea, he already would have pled. I'm
agree.
sure they offered him a plea deal beforehand, probably even a misdemeanor plea deal. And he probably said no for marketing reasons.
Right. And his firm came out yesterday saying this was the biggest travesty of the history of travesties of justice. So clearly there's antagonism.
I got two questions, and I think Robert is going to be the best one to answer. And we'll talk about it Sunday, Robert. But the enhancement seems like a no-brainer of an obligatory enhancement, of an applicable enhancement. I don't understand what it means when they say involuntary manslaughter committed while performing a lawful act. I know there's a clear answer to that. What does that mean? Involuntary manslaughter while performing a lawful act.
Well, I mean, as opposed to performing an unlawful act. So is the short answer. It's just when what you were doing was not illegal, but it had the consequence of a death because something you did was negligent in how you handled it or reckless. Right. Now, there's some issues here about intentionality, issues here about the gun. Do we like these gun enhancements? I mean, the irony is Alec Baldwin, gun control champion, is now subject to a 5-year minimum sentence because of his cheering for gun control laws, because these gun enhancements were put through by gun control people.
Don't forget the ultimate irony, Robert, that his father was the rifle coach at Massapequa High School, and he grew up with rifles in the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom, the sink. There were rifles everywhere. So, I mean, he may be a protest against his own father.
Mm.
But the DA was emphatic repeatedly, saying that this situation with the negligent homicide, the involuntary manslaughter, is not negligent homicide. It's a step above that. If that makes any sense to you two guys,
yeah,
it has
recklessness. Yeah.
Okay.
Reckless.
All right. But then there's a gun enhancement. I guess you could push a guy off a cliff by accident with no gun involved, but the gun raises the stakes, right?
Way. A typical involuntary manslaughter, I think, is 18 months, something like that. Less.
Right. That could be a drunken car crash, right, Robert?
Yeah, exactly. But I think it'll be an interesting trial. I mean, clearly, I initially didn't think he would be indicted because of the politics of New Mexico, but then he kept talking, and as we talked about, he was burying himself in ways that was almost going to force them to indict him. I was surprised they didn't add an obstruction of justice or perjury charge, which would be the easiest to convict him of.
Really?
Because I'm almost sure the same lie he told George Stephanopoulos about not pulling the trigger.
Right.
I can almost guarantee he said the same thing to the New Mexico police.
And to Cuomo.
Gentlemen, I'm not the gun mechanic here, but remember he said he pulled back the hammer at the request of Helena Hutchins. He says, pull back the hammer like this. Was this firearm, assuming that as he's pulling back the hammer, he inadvertently compresses the trigger? Would it be one of those guns where if the trigger's all the way pulled back while the hammer is back, that the hammer will release? Or was there a lock at the final moment?
There's 4 stages. There's 4 stages.
There's like 4 stages of it locking up.
Now, if he did have the trigger already pulled and he pulled the hammer back and released it, then it would go.
So let's say if he pulled the hammer back, then compressed the trigger and then released the hammer.
Reverse that. So if he had the trigger
already pulled,
which is one theory we discussed on the show, and then pulled back the hammer and released it,
then there would be nothing. There would be nothing impeding the hammer that could hit.
That's right.
Because then I'm trying to think of
the FBI forensic report ruled out his available made it clear he lied in those statements.
Right. Well, you know what I love though, this is some creative lawyering. In his little countersuit, his lawyer wrote, or somebody wrote, that the FBI said that it was a damaged gun. It's like, no, the FBI said they had to damage the gun to get the freaking thing to go off, you lying son of a. Anyway.
And for anybody who doesn't know what Eric's freaking out about, they wanted to get the compression, the releasing of the hammer, firing the gun by smashing it and having the hammer just be pressed against, but smash it. And they did that so hard it broke the gun. And now apparently it's a broken gun. How could I fire a broken gun?
He got charged, Vices. Did you see that? I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Involuntary manslaughter.
It was beautiful.
It's-
How does he not get charged? I mean, that was literally a textbook definition of what involuntary manslaughter is.
Yeah. What do you think? I think he's going to plea out to no jail time.
Well, so I think that's why they double charged him with the gun enhancement and without it. So he can go, holy shit, I'm facing minimum mandatory 5 years in prison. Let me just say, okay, I'll plead guilty. I'll get probably the same deal, the 6 months that David Hall's got. And I think poor Hannah's she's got to do a few months time. She's got to do some time.
Yeah, she fucked up worse than Baldwin. That is true. But like everybody trying to absolve Baldwin, like, no, he did the bad thing.
He pointed a gun at someone's freaking body and they died. How is that not responsible?
Yeah. And he didn't need to. And he didn't need to pull the trigger. It wasn't a scene where he should have pulled the trigger. They weren't behind the protective glass. Like all of these things, like it's like, well, he didn't know it was loaded. Everything he did in that was bad other than not knowing it was loaded as well. If he knew it was loaded, it would be murder. That's the difference. Yeah. So he ticks all the boxes.
Did you see the police questioning of Jensen Ackles?
Really? Was he there?
Well, yeah, he was there.
Okay, I didn't know Jensen was involved at all.
Yeah, he was in the movie. He was the bad guy in the movie, and he was pissed because the guy that Baldwin was supposed to be aiming at was him. Oh. He said my wife was not good for weeks after that because
he could have died.
One on the floor.
That's crazy.
But it's weird too. Like going home, like I said, like my wife is, she's emotional about it.
Well, I'm sure in her mind she's thinking, what if it was you?
That, and also that we have an 8-year-old, and that there was a 9-year-old kid who lost his mom.
Yeah, and he's talking about how he let her do the job. He didn't have any hubris. He's like, I've been handling guns longer than this girl's been alive. He's like, have you ever handled guns? I'm like, oh yeah, a little bit. And so he took her out. He let her show her. He let her show him how to load the guns, how to point them, and she suggested to go fire a few blanks. Like, so I fired a few blanks, and I did like this triple backflip with a gun and put it in my holster. And she's like, but that's her job. I let her do her job. I followed her instructions. I let her get the practice she needed, and that's how it goes. He says, I don't give a fuck who gives me a gun. I dry fire it at least 6 times into the dirt because I don't. That's the question I ask the people. What about Baldwin? Okay, what responsibility he had? Would he have done that if he put the gun to his child's head and said, no, it's clear. Go ahead, pull the trigger.
Not a chance. Not a chance would you do that. You're insane. The only time I pointed a gun at anybody, I was on stream. I pointed it at myself. The rounds for the gun were in the other side of the house, and I cleared the chamber and I cleared it before pulling it up on stream. Like I knew that thing was empty and the bullets were fucking 60 meters away upstairs in a safe. There was literally no chance of anything. And it's like, I cannot imagine pointing a gun at someone and pulling a trigger, even on a movie set.
It's cold. It's clear. Trust me. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Put it in your kid's head. Put it in your own fucking head.
How do I know? Trust me, bro. Yeah. Again, like I didn't even think about that. Ackles, like, pointed at there's 6 chambers in the revolver. Just pull the trigger 6 times. Who fucking cares? They're all dead. They won't even pop.
Yep.
Stenellis versus State and State v. Yarbrough have established that a conviction of involuntary manslaughter by negligent use of a weapon requires negligence, which is ordinary. So ordinary negligence when you have a weapon, because they're like, hey, you have a fucking weapon. So if you have a weapon, negligence is not okay if you have a weapon. It was a prop. Deborah Doodles. This is a very fair statement, but it's not a prop. It's used as a prop, but these are functioning weapons. These are guns. So it's not a plastic gun. It's not it's not a prop as my squishy gavel is a prop. My squishy gavel is a prop. It's also not a real gavel. It's also very squishy. But these weren't fake guns. It's used as a prop, but it's a real gun. Just like if I was filming something and I was using this as a prop, it's still a real cup. It might be used as a prop because it's in a movie, but it's still a real weapon. So these were real firearms, hence the ability to fire a live bullet and kill someone. But these, though used as prop, are real. So hopefully that clarifies the difference between a prop weapon. So is a prop a weapon? It's a gun. So these were real guns. These were historically accurate guns that were used. The Oscar-nominated actor's attorney has spoken out. Quote, "This decision distorts Helena Hutchins' tragic death and represents a terrible miscarriage of justice." How does it? I have questions about what the word distort means, because maybe we're using it in different ways. She went to work as a cinematographer on a movie set and was shot and killed. It is tragic. It does seem to be an accident in that no one was seeking to kill her. But some accidents are criminal in their negligence. This happens in vehicular law all the time. But someone was killed at the hands of another. That is categorized as a homicide. Whether that is a homicide that's then charged is a whole different decision. But when we're using the law in New Mexico, which is if an involuntary manslaughter is perpetrated with a weapon, it's ordinary negligence. Do we get to ordinary negligence here where someone was killed who never should have been killed? Yes, there is a long chain of circumstances that lead up to that gun being in Alec Baldwin's hand, but he had control and dominion over the gun. So he could have not pulled the trigger. But he's going to argue that she said, well, show me how you cock the gun back. There is a line that led up to bullets ending up in this gun, but also the gun ended up in his hand, and he is the one who pointed it at someone at very, very, very close range. So I can understand when they're looking at a standard of ordinary negligence and someone who died on a movie set in their jurisdiction, how the district attorney's like, we can prove negligence beyond a reasonable doubt.
How far distance-wise between Alec and the camera and then Helena and Joel?
Camera was right in there because it was a close-up. It was like literally just shooting his chest because he was drawing out the gun like this, right?
Okay.
The camera was probably 4 feet.
So it's really close.
Oh, she was right there. It was this close.
Okay.
It was this close. That's why 45 rounds goes right through her. She's not a big girl. And it's not surprising I went through her.
Any animosity between Alec and Helena?
Oh, God, no. No, everybody loved her.
Okay.
So I was standing just outside the church, right off the porch there, when the gun went off. And again, they were just setting up a shot of him pulling out the gun and showing Helena. You know, she was very kind of involved in every shot. You know, this is I'm used to kind of directors being a little bit more of like, okay, I want to see this, I want to see this, but Joel was more of like, this is the scene. Helena, how are we going to shoot it? And so she was really, for all intents and purposes, she was the meaning of director of photography. She was directing all of the camera shots, and she was very, very passionate and amazing at it. But she would get right in there. She would even like move me, like finding the light and stuff just right. So she was very, very hands-on. Some people don't do that. A lot of people don't do that. They'll just sit in their, you know, chair behind the monitor and just do like, you know, on the radio telling people to do things. But she was very hands-on. So she was standing right there next to Reed and looking at the monitor on the camera, asking Alec to show her what, you know, show me your action. So he was just showing her the action, and then it went off. I don't know if he was just drawing back on the hammer and his thumb slipped, and that was enough of a spring to get forward and hit that primer or what. But I'm sure he's told you. so I heard the shot go off. There shouldn't have been any shot go off because it was a setup. There was no cameras rolling. There wasn't supposed to be around a blank to be shot in that particular camera sequence. And nobody yelled hot gun. I just was like, what the fuck was that? And so I spun into the church. I saw Joel down screaming. I saw Helena seated. And I could see her back was to me, but I could see the blood pooling on her khaki jacket. And so I just started yelling medic.
There were live bullets in the gun, in the bandolier, on the set, on the armorer tray.
The key pieces of evidence that you used that factored into that decision.
Well, that there was such a lack of safety and safety standards on that set.
That's fair.
That there were live rounds on set. They were mixed in with regular dummy rounds. Nobody was checking those, or at least they weren't checking them consistently.
Yeah.
And then they somehow got loaded into a gun, handed off to Alec Baldwin. He didn't check it. He didn't do any of the things that he was supposed to do to make sure that he was safe or that anyone around him was safe. And then he pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins and he pulled the trigger.
You talk about the safety on the set.
So this is where we get that involuntary manslaughter, right? Like, hey, he didn't do the things he was supposed to do. So based on whatever experts they talked to, and they were going to talk to industry experts, he didn't do what he was supposed to do. And then he pointed a gun at someone and pulled the trigger. That's how we're getting to this. That's how we're getting to these charges. Involuntary, that's what involuntary manslaughter is for.
Because just because it's an accident doesn't mean that it's not criminal. Our involuntary manslaughter statute covers unintentional killings, unintentional homicides. The rest of our homicide statutes cover intentional, but unintentional means they didn't mean to do it. They didn't have the intent to kill.
They were reckless.
But it happened anyway, and it happened because of more than mere negligence, because of they didn't exercise due caution or circumspection, and that's what happened here.
And what's your response to, there might be people in Baldwin's camp who say that you were overcharging this?
Well, we disagree, and we're going to be taking that in front of a judge and allowing the judge to decide on probable cause. But we think that there is enough there, more than enough there, to move forward on these charges. And
then the misdemeanor, if you're committing a misdemeanor, you don't need that criminal negligence. You just need the committing an unlawful act that's not a felony. So tell me again what it is.
All of these things go together and show that there was just this complacency, lack of care on that set, and it's more than negligence. And I would say it rises to recklessness.
I went back too far.
The other is,
there we go.
Goes hand in hand with a misdemeanor, a petty misdemeanor here in New Mexico called negligent use of a deadly weapon. And that is that someone handled or used or touched a gun in a negligent manner. And once we show that, then that can lead to the second.
So that's where we get the alternative charges. When I was talking about what would be doing the unlawful act, what is the unlawful act? Here's the unlawful act. Petty misdemeanor, negligent use of a deadly weapon. So I'm sure that New Mexico also has a felony version of this statute. It might be a wobbler where you can charge it as a misdemeanor or a felony, because generally there are also felony negligent use of a deadly weapon. However, she's going to explain to us what it means. I will pull up the statute later when we do this for quick bits and take a look at it.
Alternative theory of involuntary manslaughter.
Does it matter for an actor? Obviously, there's been this discussion about safety on sets. The last time I interviewed you, you even mentioned you were surprised to learn that these sets operate like this in some circumstances.
I'm
but
surprised.
If you have an actor with what he or she thinks is a prop gun, not a real gun, is that actual negligence if it turns out that gun can actually shoot?
It's more than that. Every person that handles a gun has a duty to make sure that if they are going to handle that gun, point it at someone and pull the trigger, that it is not going to fire a projectile and kill someone. And this is really about justice for Helena Hutchins. We've talked to many actors, A-list and otherwise, that have said that they always check their guns, or they have someone check it in front of them.
Will he do jail time? Alec Baldwin is presumed innocent. If he is convicted, could he do probationary time? Yes. That's a very real possibility in this case. So it is way too soon to tell. So it just depends. But no, that will be up to a judge if he's convicted or if he takes a plea deal. which it seems he's unlikely to do, given that his attorney said, "We will win."
Thing in there that I wanted to see if you could
The
ask
chat's
her really
bay.
quick. She said that Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger. Baldwin told ABC he was adamant he did not pull the trigger. She is
Thanks, chat. This is a good question.
confident Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger.
Yeah, so my colleague Kate is asking, so Baldwin has said that he didn't pull the trigger. Obviously, we know the FBI report says that that gun could not have gone off cocked without pulling the trigger. Are you confident that he actually pulled the trigger?
Yes, absolutely. The FBI lab is one of the best in the world, and we absolutely believe that the trigger had to have been pulled in order for that gun to go off. The trigger was pulled.
So that your assessment is based on that FBI.
The trigger was pulled. The district attorney has said Baldwin pulled the trigger.
Quantico looking at the gun itself and how it operated.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons that this investigation did take a long time. We were waiting on that, trying to make sure we had all of the evidence and were able to gather absolutely everything. And we were sure of these charges before we filed them.
You know, obviously you look at the facts of this case, but you know, you mentioned before how surprised you were to see the lack of safety on this set. Are you also trying to maybe send a message to other, you know, people out there making movies that look, there will be consequences? Is that part of your decision?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ma'am, is your message fuck around and find out? Absolutely. Let's go back. That's the question. Is your message to film sets fuck around and find out?
In New Mexico, we want you to come here. We want you to film movies, but we want you to do it safely. And we certainly want to get justice for anyone
don't kill people.
that is a victim. Like in this case, we want to get justice for Helena Hutchins.
Yeah.
It's about damn time. I'ma need like 2 shots in my cup.